She was a woman overlooked by the world, dismissed, belittled, and treated as invisible. Her fight for justice was nothing more than a whispered hope in a society built on silence. But when a powerful judge humiliates her in court, denying her case with a contempt she had never known, something inside her shifts. What happens when a woman, pushed to the brink, finally dares to confront the world that tried to crush her? The courthouse loomed against the storm-gray sky, its tall, stone columns drenched in the faint drizzle that had begun an hour earlier. A biting wind cut through the air, sending the few remaining protesters outside huddling beneath their signs. The words "Justice for All" on their placards seemed almost ironic, given what had transpired within those walls. Inside, the courtroom was suffocatingly silent. The polished mahogany benches reflected the dim, artificial light of the high ceiling. At the front, presiding over the room like a self-appointed monarch, sat Judge Robert Whitaker. His expression was carved from granite, his thinning silver hair combed back meticulously, as though even a single out-of-place strand would offend his sense of order. Before him stood Amara Johnson, her back straight despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. She clutched the edge of the wooden podium, her knuckles pale against her deep brown skin. She had rehearsed this moment endlessly, her argument honed to razor-sharp precision. And yet, as she looked up into the judge's cold, unblinking eyes, she felt the certainty she had carried with her falter, like a candle flickering against the wind. "The evidence is clear, Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but edged with urgency. "The company knowingly exposed its workers to hazardous conditions without proper protection. My sister, along with countless others, has suffered irreparable harm. They deserve justice." Judge Whitaker leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him. He tapped a pen against the desk, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to echo throughout the room. "Miss Johnson," he said, his tone clipped and condescending, "you've made your case. Repeatedly. But the law requires more than emotional appeals and circumstantial evidence." The words struck Amara like a slap. Her breath hitched, but she quickly masked it, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "With respect, Your Honor," she replied, her voice tightening, "this isn't about emotion. The documents we submitted clearly show negligence. The testimonies." Whitaker held up a hand, silencing her. His pale blue eyes bore into hers, a faint glimmer of disdain flickering in their depths. "I've reviewed the documents, and frankly, they're unconvincing. This court does not have the time to entertain baseless accusations. Case dismissed." The words hung in the air like a death knell. A collective gasp rippled through the small gallery behind Amara, where a handful of supporters, family members, activists, and legal interns, sat frozen in shock. Amara felt her chest constrict, her grip on the podium tightening until her nails dug into the wood. She wanted to scream, to protest, to demand he look her in the eyes and explain how he could so casually disregard the lives destroyed by his decision. But she knew it would do no good. The gavel came down with a resounding crack, and just like that, it was over. Amara turned slowly, her eyes scanning the gallery. Her mother, a frail woman with gray streaks in her tightly coiled hair, sat near the back, clutching a handkerchief to her mouth. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had taught Amara to be strong, to hold her head high even in the face of defeat. But today, even her resolve seemed to waver. As Amara stepped down from the podium, the whispers began. "Unbelievable," someone muttered. "He didn't even give her a chance. He always sides with the corporations. Always." The words buzzed around her, faint and indistinct, like the static of a distant radio. She moved through the crowd in a daze, her mind replaying the judge's dismissal over and over, each repetition slicing deeper into her already battered heart. Outside the courtroom, the air was thick with humidity, the rain now falling in earnest. Amara stopped beneath the stone awning, staring out at the storm. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the courthouse steps in stark, white light. Behind her, the door creaked open, and a familiar voice called her name, Amara. She turned to see Marcus, a young law intern who had worked tirelessly by her side throughout the case. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew, and his dark eyes brimmed with the same frustration that churned within her. "That was a sham," he said, his voice low but trembling with anger. He didn't even pretend to be impartial. Amara sighed, her shoulders slumping for the first time that day. "We knew this would be an uphill battle. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, swallowing hard. "I thought we had a chance." Marcus stepped closer, his hand hovering near her arm, but not quite touching. "We did, and we still do. This isn't over." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "It feels like it is." He hesitated, then reached into his bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "There's something you need to see." Amara frowned, her brow furrowing as she took the envelope. "What is it?" "Something I found while going through the case files. I wasn't sure if it was relevant at first, but after today," he trailed off, his gaze shifting to the darkened sky. She opened the envelope with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the documents inside. At first, they seemed like standard legal papers, contracts, memos, meeting notes. But then, a name jumped out at her, sending a jolt through her entire body. "Where did you get this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Marcus hesitated, his expression wary. "It was in the discovery materials, buried under a mountain of irrelevant files. I almost missed it." Amara's eyes darted back to the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. The name on the document wasn't just familiar, it was significant. It was a connection, a thread leading to someone who might be the key to unraveling everything. Her lawyer, the one she hadn't yet met in person, who had worked behind the scenes for reasons she had never fully understood. The same lawyer who had insisted on remaining anonymous until now. Amara's mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations, rumors, and suspicions. She had always assumed the lawyer was just another overworked, underpaid advocate fighting for justice in a broken system. But now, as the truth stared back at her from the page, she realized there was much more to the story than she had ever imagined. "This changes everything," she whispered, her grip on the document tightening. Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "Exactly. We need to figure out why this was hidden and what it means for the case. But more importantly, we need to find out who your lawyer really is." Amara's gaze shifted to the courthouse behind them, the imposing building now shrouded in darkness. The storm raged on, thunder rumbling like a distant drumbeat. For the first time in hours, a spark of determination flickered within her. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as she stood there, rain pouring around her and the weight of injustice pressing down on her shoulders, she made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And when she did, Judge Whitaker would have no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. Rain lashed against the window of Amara's cramped apartment as she sat at the small, cluttered desk in the corner. The dim light of a single desk lamp illuminated the documents spread before her, the ink smudged in places from her trembling hands. She had spent hours poring over the files Marcus had handed her, but the more she read, the less sense it made. The name on the paper, Ellis Jameson, gnawed at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. It wasn't just that she recognized it. There was something about it that felt off, a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit no matter how hard she tried. She leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her curls and exhaling sharply. Her eyes drifted to the rain-streaked window, where the city lights blurred into a haze of gold and gray. Somewhere out there, in the vast sprawl of concrete and steel, was the answer she needed. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Marcus's name flashing. "Hey," she said, picking up. "I've been thinking about the documents," Marcus began without preamble. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he were afraid of being overheard. "There's something strange about how they were filed." Amara frowned, her grip on the phone tightening. "What do you mean?" Most of the discovery materials came directly from the company's records. But this one, the one with Jameson's name on it, was buried in an old case file from 10 years ago. It wasn't even supposed to be part of our discovery. Amara's stomach churned. So, how did it end up in our files? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but whoever put it there wanted you to find it. The line went silent for a moment, save for the faint hum of static. Amara stared at the document on her desk, the name glaring up at her like an accusation. Do you think it's a trap? She asked finally. It's possible, Marcus said. But if it is, it's a damn good one. Jameson's name carries weight. If he's involved in this case, even tangentially, it changes everything. Amara bit her lip, her mind racing. Ellis Jameson was a name she hadn't heard in years, but it was impossible to forget. He was a renowned civil rights lawyer, a man who had built his career on fighting for the underdog. But there was more to his story, rumors of scandals, betrayals, and deals made in the shadows. Do you think he's connected to the judge? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Marcus replied. But if he is, it could explain a lot. Amara closed her eyes, her pulse thundering in her ears. The judge's dismissal of her case, the buried document, Jameson's name, it all felt too coincidental to be random. I need to find him, she said finally. Amara, wait, Marcus interjected, his tone sharp. This could be dangerous. If someone wanted you to find that document, they might be watching you. You can't just. I don't have a choice. She cut him off. If Jameson is the key to this case, I need to know why. And I need to know now. Marcus sighed heavily, but he didn't argue. Just be careful, okay? Call me if anything feels off. I will, she promised before hanging up. The next morning, the rain had subsided, leaving the city damp and glistening under a pale gray sky. Amara stood outside a nondescript office building, the address scrawled on a scrap of paper in her hand. The name on the door read Ellis Jameson, Esq. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the door handle. A part of her wanted to turn around, to pretend she had never found the document. But the other part, the part that had fought tooth and nail for justice her entire life, propelled her forward. Inside, the office was smaller than she expected, with walls lined with bookshelves crammed full of legal texts. A middle-aged woman with a kind face sat behind a cluttered desk, typing furiously on an ancient computer. Can I help you? The woman asked, looking up. I'm here to see Mr. Jameson, Amara said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. The woman frowned. Do you have an appointment? No, but... I'm afraid he doesn't take walk-ins, the woman interrupted, her tone polite but firm. Amara clenched her fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. It's important. Please, just tell him Amara Johnson is here. He'll understand. The woman hesitated, her eyes scanning Amara's face as if searching for something. Finally, she picked up the phone and dialed a number. Mr. Jameson, there's a young woman here to see you. She says her name is Amara Johnson. A pause. Yes, sir. I'll send her in. The woman hung up and gestured toward a door at the end of the hall. You can go in. Amara nodded her thanks and walked down the hall, her heart pounding with each step. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. Ellis Jameson was not what she expected. He was younger than she remembered from the articles she had read, his sharp features softened by a neatly trimmed beard. His piercing gray eyes locked onto hers as he stood from behind his desk, his posture confident but not intimidating. Miss Johnson, he said, extending a hand. I've been expecting you. The words sent a chill down her spine. You have, she asked, keeping her voice calm despite the unease creeping into her chest. Jameson smiled faintly, gesturing for her to sit. Please have a seat. We have much to discuss. Amara sat cautiously, her eyes never leaving his. Why was your name on that document? She demanded. Jameson's smile faded, replaced by a serious expression. Because I put it there. The confession hit her like a punch to the gut. You, why? To protect you, he said simply. Amara's confusion deepened. Protect me from what? Jameson leaned forward, his eyes dark and intense. From the people who want to see you fail. The judge, the company, their lawyers. They've all been playing a game, and you've been their pawn. I gave you that document to level the playing field. Amara stared at him, her mind racing. But why me? Why are you helping me? Jameson hesitated, his jaw tightening. Because I owe someone a debt. Someone who believed in justice as much as you do. Before she could press him further, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the office. Jameson's expression shifted instantly, his eyes narrowing. Get down, he hissed, pulling her out of her chair just as the door burst open. Two men in dark suits entered, their faces blank, but their movements deliberate. Amara's heart raced as she crouched behind the desk, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Jameson stood his ground, his voice calm but firm. This is private property. You have no right to be here. The men said nothing, but one of them stepped forward, pulling a document from his pocket and slamming it onto the desk. You've been served, the man said coldly before turning and leaving with his companion. Jameson picked up the document, his expression unreadable. Amara stood slowly, her legs shaky beneath her. What was that? She demanded. Jameson sighed, running a hand through his hair. That, Miss Johnson, was your first glimpse of the people we're up against. And believe me, they won't stop until they've destroyed everything you care about. Amara's chest tightened, a mixture of fear and determination coursing through her. Then we'll stop them first. For the first time, Jameson smiled, a real, genuine smile. Now you're starting to understand. The rain returned that evening, falling in thin, relentless sheets that turned the city streets into rivers of glistening black. Amara sat alone in her apartment, the dim glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The air inside felt thick and oppressive, weighed down by the words Ellis Jameson had spoken earlier that day. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything you care about. The phrase played on a loop in her mind, its sharp edges cutting into her resolve. She had spent years building walls around herself, shielding her heart from the inevitable betrayals and disappointments of the world. But this case, this fight, had cracked those walls, and now she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since she was a child. Her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with Marcus's name. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "Hey," Marcus replied. His tone was soft, careful, as if he could sense the storm brewing inside her. "I just wanted to check in. How did it go with Jameson?" Amara leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. It was intense. He knew I'd find the document. He put it there on purpose. What? Marcus sounded genuinely shocked. Why would he do that? He said he was trying to protect me, Amara explained, but he wouldn't say from what, or from who. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was laced with unease. "Amara, are you sure you can trust him? This whole thing feels off." Amara closed her eyes, the weight of his question pressing down on her. "I don't know, but right now, he's the only lead I have." Marcus sighed, the sound heavy with concern. "Just be careful, okay? And remember, you're not in this alone. Whatever happens, I've got your back." A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Thanks, Marcus. That means a lot." After they hung up, Amara sat in silence for a long time, the rain drumming against the window like a heartbeat. She thought about Marcus, his unwavering support, his steady presence in her life, and felt a pang of guilt. She had always kept him at arm's length, afraid to let him get too close. But now, as the walls around her began to crumble, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. The next morning, she arrived at Jameson's office to find the door ajar. Her heart skipped a beat as she pushed it open, stepping inside cautiously. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the empty space. The office was eerily quiet, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee and old paper. Books and files were scattered across the desk, as if someone had been searching for something in a hurry. "Jameson," she tried again, her pulse quickening. A muffled sound came from the back room, followed by the faint creak of floorboards. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she moved toward the noise, her footsteps careful and deliberate. When she reached the doorway, she froze. Jameson was there, slumped against the wall with blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. "Oh my God," Amara whispered, rushing to his side. "What happened?" Jameson opened his eyes slowly, his gaze unfocused. "They found me," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I tried to stop them, but—" "Stop who?" Amara demanded, her hands trembling as she pressed a piece of cloth to his wound. Jameson grimaced, his jaw tightening. "They're watching you. They know you're getting close." Amara's blood ran cold. Who's watching me?" But Jameson didn't answer. His eyes fluttered shut, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he had stopped breathing. "Stay with me," she pleaded, shaking him gently. "I need answers, damn it. Who's behind this?" Jameson's eyes opened again, just barely. "Trust no one," he whispered before losing consciousness. Hours later, Amara sat in the waiting room of a hospital, her mind racing. She had called an ambulance as soon as Jameson passed out, but now she was left with more questions than answers. Who had attacked him, and why? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her name. She looked up to see a nurse standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You can see him now," the nurse said. Amara followed her down the hall to a small, dimly lit room. Jameson lay on the bed, his head wrapped in bandages. He looked fragile, almost unrecognizable from the confident, imposing figure she had met just days earlier. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and anger. "But you need to start telling me the truth." Jameson turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "I told you to stay away," he said weakly. "And I told you I'm not walking away from this," she shot back. "You said they're watching me. Who are they? What do they want?" Jameson sighed, his expression pained. "It's bigger than you think, Amara. The judge, the company, they're just pawns in a much larger game. There are people pulling the strings, people who will do whatever it takes to protect their interests." Amara felt a knot form in her stomach. "And you? Are you one of them?" Jameson's eyes hardened. "I used to be, but not anymore. That's why they want me dead." His words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and foreboding. Amara took a step back, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. "If you're not with them, then why did you help me?" she asked finally. "Because I see myself in you," Jameson admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I made mistakes I can't take back. But you have a chance to make things right." Amara stared at him, her emotions swirling like a tempest. She wanted to trust him, to believe that he was on her side. But a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he was letting on. "I need proof," she said, her voice firm. "If I'm going to keep fighting this case, I need to know who I'm up against." Jameson nodded slowly. "There's a safe in my office. The combination is 9-2-7-4. Inside, you'll find everything you need." Amara hesitated. "What if they come back?" "They will," Jameson said grimly. "But you don't have a choice. If you want the truth, you have to take the risk." Later that night, Amara stood in Jameson's office once again, her heart pounding as she entered the combination into the safe. The door swung open with a metallic groan, revealing a stack of files and a flash drive. She grabbed everything and stuffed it into her bag, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes on her, the sense of danger pressing down on her like a physical force. As she turned to leave, a faint sound reached her ears, the creak of a floorboard behind her. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice shaking. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a man with cold, calculating eyes and a smirk that sent chills down her spine. "Well, well," the man said, his voice dripping with mockery. "It seems you've stumbled into something you shouldn't have." Amara took a step back, her mind racing. She clutched her bag tightly, her resolve hardening despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But I'm not going to stop. Whatever you're hiding, I'll find it." The man's smirk widened. "We'll see about that." And with that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Amara alone in the dimly lit office, her heart pounding like a drum. Amara's hands shook as she flipped through the files in her apartment, her eyes scanning each document with growing dread. The safe had yielded more than she'd bargained for. Inside, she'd found copies of emails, contracts, and legal papers, each piece of the puzzle pointing toward a conspiracy so large it made her head spin. The information seemed like it could tear apart everything she had fought for. It was a labyrinth of corruption, a tangled web that connected her case to forces she had never dreamed of. She paused at one file, its edges worn, as though it had been handled many times. The file contained a series of phone records, with calls logged between Judge Thompson and an unnamed party. Her heart skipped a beat as she scanned the names of those involved. One name stood out, like a hidden truth waiting to be unearthed. Marcus. Her Marcus. The weight of it hit her like a freight train, the world spinning as she reread the document. There was no mistaking it. His name appeared on several calls, and the records spanned over the past few weeks. The dates aligned with the sudden shifts in her case, the moments when things started to feel off. She could feel the blood drain from her face as she slowly sat back, the files slipping from her hands. No, this didn't make sense. Marcus had been her rock, her unwavering ally in all of this. He had been the one to tell her to be careful, the one who had promised to stand by her. But the evidence was undeniable. Why would Marcus be connected to Judge Thompson, the very man who had dismissed her case without a second thought? Why had he hidden this from her? Her mind raced. Try and make sense of it. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe Marcus was being blackmailed or manipulated. But deep down, she knew better. The truth was sinking in like a cold, dark tide that was slowly drowning her, and she couldn't escape it. The person she had trusted most in this battle, her closest confidant, had been hiding something from her all along. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She looked up, startled, as if the very sound had broken some invisible barrier in her mind. The knock came again, louder this time, and Amara hesitated for a moment before walking to the door. She knew who it was before she even looked through the peephole. Marcus stood in the hallway, his face obscured by the shadows cast by the overhead light. She opened the door, her heart pounding. "Hey," Marcus said, his voice light, almost casual. But there was a strain beneath the surface, something that she hadn't noticed before, something that made her insides twist with discomfort. "Hey," she replied, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "What's up?" Marcus stepped inside, his usual confidence giving way to an unease she had never seen in him. "I wanted to check on you. After everything that happened with Jameson and the hospital, I figured you might need some company." Amara nodded, stepping aside to let him in, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something just beyond the surface of his words. The sight of his familiar face, his kind eyes, everything she had come to trust about him, was suddenly foreign to her. "Thanks for checking in," she said slowly, her voice distant. "But I've been busy." She motioned to the scattered files on the table, each one a piece of her unraveling reality. "I've been going through some stuff, trying to figure out what's really going on." Marcus gave her a small smile, but there was something cold about it. "I can't imagine how overwhelming this must be, but you're not alone in this. You know that, right?" Amara forced herself to look at him, meeting his gaze head-on. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to the image of the man she had known for so long. But the documents, the evidence, the nagging feeling in her gut, It was all too much. Too many contradictions, too many red flags. "I know," she whispered, before the words left her lips. "But there's something I need to ask you, Marcus." His eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. A tiny crack in the veneer. He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "Anything. You can ask me anything." Amara stared at his hand, the warmth of his touch doing nothing to calm the storm inside her. She wanted to trust him, more than anything, but the truth had a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how much you tried to suppress it. "I found something," she said quietly. "In the files. Marcus, your name, your number. It's in there. In the phone records between Judge Thompson and someone I don't know." Marcus froze. The breath seemed to leave his body all at once, his face blanching as the blood drained from it. He withdrew his hand from her arm, taking a step back, as if the air had turned suffocating. "Amara, I can explain," he stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "No." She cut him off, her voice sharp, her eyes hard. "You can't. Not anymore." The silence between them was deafening. Amara felt her chest tighten as the reality of the situation settled in like a weight she couldn't lift. Everything she thought she knew about Marcus, about the world she had been fighting to protect, everything was a lie. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "Tell me the truth, Marcus. What is this? Why were you involved with Judge Thompson? What's going on?" For a long moment, Marcus didn't speak. His gaze dropped to the floor, and Amara could see the struggle on his face, how much he wanted to deny it, to pretend like it wasn't happening. But the truth was in the air between them now, thick and suffocating. "Amara, I never wanted you to get involved in this," he said, his voice low. "I thought if I could keep you safe, keep you out of it, I could protect you from the consequences. But I was wrong. I'm so sorry." Amara's stomach churned as the words sank in. "You were using me, weren't you?" she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of the revelation. "You knew what I was after. You knew all along, and you let me. No, you encouraged me to keep going, knowing I was walking straight into a trap." Marcus's face twisted with regret, but it did nothing to ease the anger burning in Amara's chest. "I never wanted this for you. I wanted to protect you, Amara. But I was stuck. I had no choice. They had leverage over me, over my family, and I thought I could handle it. But it's bigger than I ever imagined. I never meant for you to get hurt." Amara felt like the ground had fallen out beneath her. She had believed in him, had trusted him with her heart, her fears, her ambitions. And now, all of that had been built on a lie. Everything she had fought for, everything she had risked, had been a game to him. "You never meant for me to get hurt," she repeated, the anger now spilling out, sharp and bitter. "You let me walk into this mess knowing full well what I was up against. You knew what I would uncover, and you used me to get to it. And now you're telling me you're sorry." Her voice was rising, trembling with a mix of rage and betrayal. She didn't care if it scared him. She didn't care if it broke her. All that mattered now was that the truth had come to light, and it was darker than anything she could have ever imagined. Marcus looked away, guilt and shame flooding his features. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Amara felt the world shift under her feet as she stepped back, her body trembling with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said, the words heavy with finality. "I can't do this. Not with you." And with that, she turned away, leaving him standing there in the dimly lit apartment, his regrets and apologies echoing in the silence between them. Amara paced the apartment, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her like a suffocating fog, and she couldn't escape it. Every piece of evidence she uncovered, every conversation with Marcus that now seemed laced with lies, had brought her to this point of unbearable uncertainty. The documents were spread out before her on the table, their meaning clear but chilling. Marcus's betrayal, Judge Thompson's manipulation, and the dark undercurrents of corruption that snaked through the very heart of the system she had once believed in. She had thought she could trust people. She had thought that her pursuit of justice would lead to something pure, something good. But now everything felt tainted. Her eyes drifted to the photograph of her mother on the desk. She had promised her mother, before she passed, that she would fight for what was right, no matter the cost. Amara clenched her fists, the photo blurring as tears welled up in her eyes. But now the truth seemed like a curse. The more she dug, the more she uncovered, the more tangled the web became. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting to hold onto the remnants of the life she thought she understood. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. She didn't have to guess who it was. The weight of his presence lingered like a storm cloud even before she opened the door. "Marcus," she said flatly as she swung it open. He stood there, his face drawn, eyes shadowed with regret. He looked like a man who knew he was walking toward his own destruction, but was still too consumed by whatever drove him to stop. "You need to hear me out, Amara," he said, voice hoarse, like the words had been stuck in his throat for too long. She shook her head, not allowing him to step inside. "No, Marcus. I don't need to hear anything. I've heard enough." The anger, the betrayal, and the pain twisted inside her like a knife, and she wasn't sure she wanted to hear his explanation anymore. The truth had broken her trust in ways that words couldn't repair. But Marcus, desperate and unwilling to give up on whatever they had, pressed on. "I didn't want you involved in this, Amara," he said quietly, eyes searching hers for a sign of understanding. "I never wanted you to find out this way. But now that you have," he trailed off, the rest of his thoughts hanging in the air between them like a toxic cloud. "It's too dangerous for you. You need to stop before it's too late." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. Stop. It was too late for that. She couldn't stop now, not when she was so deep in this fight. "You think I'm just going to walk away from all of this?" she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "After everything I've done, after everything you've dragged me into?" Marcus's eyes darkened. "This isn't just about you, Amara. You're not the only one at risk here. I've been working for them much longer than you think. They have leverage over me. They've been controlling every step of this case, my case, your case. This whole mess is their doing." Amara felt her heart drop into her stomach. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, barely able to get the words out. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial hush. "There's more. A lot more. You think Judge Thompson is the only one pulling the strings? He's just one part of a much larger network. The higher-ups, Amara, they've been watching us, manipulating everything from the beginning. The people who put me in this position. They own everything. The judge, the lawyers, even the witnesses." He hesitated, swallowing hard before continuing. "Including you." Her head spun, her mind struggling to keep up with the revelations. "Me? What do you mean, including me?" "The case, your case," he said, his voice breaking. "It was never going to win. Not the way you thought. It was a setup from the start. You were never meant to succeed." He met her eyes, a look of guilt and sorrow passing between them. "I thought I could protect you, keep you out of it, but I've been just as trapped as you. They've been watching us both, every step of the way." The weight of his words hit her like a slap. Everything she had fought for, the justice she had so fiercely believed in, the trust she had placed in Marcus, had been part of a game she didn't even know she was playing. She had been a pawn all along, and now the board was turning against her. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me?" He closed his eyes, his face contorting with regret. "Because I was scared. I thought if I kept you close, kept you in the dark, you'd be safe. But they were always going to come for you. I thought you'd be protected if you didn't know the truth. I was wrong." He stepped closer, his hand trembling as it reached for hers. "Amara, please. You have to trust me. We can't win this alone. We need to work together." She pulled her hand away, feeling a cold, unfamiliar fury bubble up inside her. "Together," she scoffed. "After everything you've done, after everything I've learned, you want me to trust you again? You've lied to me. You've manipulated me. You've let me fight a battle that was already lost, all for your own protection." Her voice cracked, the pain surging through her once more. "How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" "I never wanted this for you," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear." Her mind raced, and she could feel the edges of her world begin to spin again. Betrayal and lies had already shattered her, and now the very foundation of her fight for justice had been built on a bed of deceit. But the truth was clear. Marcus had his own motives, his own fears, and she had never truly known what he was willing to sacrifice to protect himself. Yet despite everything, she could see it in his eyes. The desperation, the regret. He was trapped in a game far beyond either of them, and no matter how much she hated him for it, part of her understood. But understanding didn't make the pain of his betrayal go away. It only added another layer to it. "Amara," he whispered, his voice breaking as he took another step toward her. "Please don't do this. You can't walk away now. You can't stop fighting. They'll finish us both off. They'll make sure you're destroyed, too." Her heart thudded in her chest. She didn't know what to believe anymore. She didn't know whether to trust Marcus, whether to fight alongside him, or whether to let him go completely. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't quit now. The stakes had grown too high, and the truth was tangled in a web so thick that pulling away meant getting lost in the threads forever. "Don't you see?" she whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "I'm already caught in this web, and now it's too late to turn back." The courtroom was a battleground now, its walls steeped in history and power. Amara stood at the center of it, every inch of her skin alive with the weight of what was about to unfold. The air felt thick, suffocating even, as though the very room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to break free. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. This was it, the moment everything would change. Judge Thompson sat at the front, his gavel resting in front of him like a death sentence waiting to be handed down. His eyes were cold, unreadable. He hadn't flinched when Amara stepped into the courtroom, even though the truth that she was about to reveal could tear his world apart. He was a man who had mastered the art of keeping his emotions hidden, but Amara could see the faintest tremor in his jaw, the clench of his fists under the table. He was nervous, but he would never show it. And then there was Marcus, standing behind her now, his presence like a shadow that loomed over her every move. He had come with her, but whether out of guilt or some twisted need for redemption, she couldn't tell. She felt him there, but his role in all of this was over. She would face this final moment alone. The tension in the room was palpable. The jury watched her, their eyes filled with curiosity and judgment as they waited for her next move. They were already so deep in this tangled web of lies and corruption, each one of them unaware of how far this scandal would reach once the truth was unleashed. Amara had gathered the evidence, the documents, the recordings, the witnesses. She had all. And now, it was time to bring it all crashing down. "Your Honor," Amara said, her voice clear but laced with a quiet rage. "I have here proof of a systemic conspiracy, one that has been hidden in plain sight, orchestrated by those in positions of power, including this very courtroom." The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the world had stopped turning, suspended in the heavy air of anticipation. She placed the stack of documents onto the table with deliberate care. The sound of paper sliding against paper echoed through the room, sharp and unsettling. "I have recordings of conversations between Judge Thompson and several officials," she continued, her eyes locked onto the judge. "I have evidence of deals made in dark corners, promises exchanged in hushed whispers. This case wasn't about justice. It was never about the law. It was about keeping the powerful in control." The room seemed to shrink around her, the weight of her words pulling everyone closer to the brink of a revelation they hadn't been prepared for. Judge Thompson's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before he regained his composure. But Amara saw it, the crack in the facade. He was no longer in control. The world that he had built with lies and manipulation was beginning to crumble. "You're lying," the judge spat, his voice hoarse, but there was no conviction in his words. It was the reaction of a man cornered, one who knew the truth but refused to admit it. "Am I?" Amara's voice was low, but it carried an authority that struck to the core. "Do you think this is the first time your actions have been exposed? Do you really believe you've been untouchable all these years?" She turned to the jury, her gaze sweeping across their faces. They were all still, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and unease. "Look at the evidence," she urged. "Look at the connections, the trail of corruption that stretches all the way to the highest courts. You've been complicit in a system that allows men like him to destroy lives without consequence. And I am not the only one who has been hurt by it." Amara's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything she had fought for. The years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the betrayal, the pain. She felt every ounce of it, but it didn't matter anymore. She was here, and she was going to make sure they saw the truth. Judge Thompson's gaze faltered, just for a moment, before he regained his composure. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, though the words came out less forceful than before. "This is all a lie, a fabrication. You're grasping at straws, Amara. You can't." "Don't pretend." She cut him off sharply. "You don't get to play the victim now. Not after everything you've done." Her voice rang out, harsh and unforgiving. She was done with playing games, done with pretending that the truth didn't matter. She had come too far to back down, too far to let him slip away. The stakes had never been higher. "Let's not pretend that this is about a single case anymore," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. "This is about everything you've destroyed, the lives you've ruined, the people you've silenced." As her words echoed in the stillness of the courtroom, Amara took a step forward, facing the judge squarely. "You used me. You used my case to protect yourself and everyone else in your pocket. But today, it ends." She looked at Marcus then, the man who had once been the one person she trusted, the one person she thought could protect her. But in that moment, she saw him for who he truly was, a man just as trapped as she had been, his motives as tangled as the system they had both tried to fight. Marcus took a deep breath, his face pale, his hand clenched into a fist at his side. He didn't speak, but the guilt was written all over him. He was complicit, and no amount of regret could erase that. "I've done things, terrible things," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. He met her eyes, but there was no redemption in his gaze. "I thought I was protecting you, Amara. I thought I was doing what was best, but I was wrong. And now," he hesitated, "now it's too late." She didn't answer him. She didn't need to. The moment for explanations had passed. The time for redemption was over. With one final glance at Marcus, Amara turned back to the judge. "You don't get to hide behind the law anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Your reign of manipulation is over." Judge Thompson's face twisted with fury, his composure slipping away for the first time. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward, but Amara didn't flinch. She had faced the storm long enough to know that nothing could stop the truth from coming to light. And in that moment, it felt as though the entire courtroom, the world itself, had shifted. The final pieces were falling into place. The veil that had clouded her vision lifted, and for the first time in years, Amara saw the world as it truly was: brutal, broken, but with the possibility of change. As the judge stammered, trying to regain control, Amara stood tall, knowing that whatever came next, she had won. Not just the case, not just the battle, but the war for justice. The gavel came down. The courtroom had emptied by the time the gavel fell. The long shadows of the evening stretched across the floor, silent witnesses to the chaos that had just unfolded. Amara stood alone in the center, her breath steady, though her heart still pounded in her chest. The weight of what she had done hung in the air around her, thick and suffocating. She had won, but it hadn't come without a cost. Judge Thompson had been stripped of his title, the corruption he had fought so hard to conceal exposed for the world to see. But even in his defeat, there was no satisfaction in her victory. The case was won, the truth laid bare, but something deeper lingered, something that couldn't be erased with a single courtroom judgment. Amara walked out of the courthouse, the cool evening air biting at her skin, the world outside feeling both familiar and foreign. The sounds of the city surrounded her, the distant hum of traffic, the murmur of voices in the streets. People passed by, lost in their own lives, unaware of the storm that had just passed through the halls of justice. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, the weight of her actions still pressing on her chest. The fight was over, but the scars would remain. No one who had been part of this journey would walk away unmarked. As she reached her car, Marcus stepped out from the shadows, his figure appearing like a ghost in the dim light. For a moment, Amara didn't recognize him. He was a stranger now, a man who had once been a part of her life, but who had betrayed her in ways she couldn't even begin to process. "I don't know why I expected," Marcus said, his voice strained, filled with regret. "But not this. Not this kind of pain." Amara turned to face him, her eyes hardening. "Pain is something you know too well, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, his eyes lowering to the ground. "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was doing what was best for both of us. But I was wrong." She looked at him for a long moment, considering his words, before speaking again. "You were never protecting me. You were protecting yourself. And in the end, you dragged me down with you." "I didn't think it would cost you this much," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't think you would have to lose so much just to uncover the truth." Amara didn't respond immediately. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of years of betrayal, of a shared past that had been shattered by the ugly truths they had both uncovered. The pain was too fresh to be healed with mere words. "You're right," Amara finally said, her voice low and steady. "I lost a lot. I lost trust. I lost time. And I lost a piece of myself along the way." She paused, the cold night air brushing against her face. "But I gained something, too." Marcus raised his eyes to meet hers, the question lingering in the air between them. "I gained the truth," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I gained the courage to face it, and I gained the strength to stand on my own, even when everything around me was crumbling." Marcus stepped forward, as if drawn to the resolve in her voice, but Amara held up her hand, stopping him. "I'm done," she said, her voice final. "There's nothing left for me here." He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. Instead, he simply nodded, the weight of their shared history too great to bear any longer. Without another word, Marcus turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the night. Amara watched him go, her heart heavy, but her mind clear. She had fought for so long, had carried the burden of her past on her shoulders, but now, for the first time, she felt free. Free from the lies, the deceit, the manipulation that had been woven into every corner of her life. Free from the people who had claimed to protect her, only to tear her down when they needed to. But with that freedom came a sharp, undeniable truth. There would be no return to the person she had once been. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The woman who had entered the courtroom months ago, the woman who had believed in justice and fairness and truth, was gone. In her place stood a new version of herself. Someone hardened by the battle, shaped by the choices she had made, but not broken. She was no longer the naive woman who had trusted easily, who had believed in the system, in the people who were supposed to protect her. That version of her was gone, buried beneath layers of betrayal and loss. As Amara sat in her car, the engine humming softly beneath her, her gaze drifted to the rearview mirror. She could see her reflection there, but it was no longer just a reflection. It was a reminder of everything she had overcome. The person staring back at her was someone who had fought tooth and nail for the truth, someone who had faced the darkness head-on and come out stronger on the other side. But that didn't mean she was without scars. The emotional toll of everything she had endured was still there, lurking beneath the surface, ready to break through at any moment. She had faced betrayal from the people she had trusted most. She had been manipulated, used, and discarded. But she had also learned something vital, that justice was not something given to you by others. It was something you had to fight for, something you had to take for yourself, no matter the cost. And yet, even as she reflected on her journey, Amara couldn't help but wonder, had it all been worth it? She thought about the people whose lives had been affected by the corruption she had uncovered, those whose names had been swept under the rug, their stories forgotten. She thought about the countless others who would never get the chance to stand in a courtroom and expose the truth. Had she really made a difference? Or had she simply taken down one man, only to find that the system remained as corrupt as ever? The road ahead was uncertain. But then again, she had always known that it would be. There were no guarantees, no easy answers. But Amara had learned something important through her struggle. She had learned that sometimes the truth was all you had. And sometimes that was enough. She took a deep breath and started the car, the engine purring to life as she pulled away from the courthouse. The city stretched out before her, a sprawling landscape of light and shadow, of hope and despair, of what had been and what could still be. She didn't know where her journey would take her next, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer afraid to walk it alone. And as the miles rolled by, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. A small, fleeting hope, buried beneath the weight of everything she had endured. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was only the beginning.